Sunday.
Sunday.
I will call in exactly this.
Okay.
You know, so
I will, yeah. After the 11th, yes.
MCC, please rise and join us in our opening song.
We give you thanks for making this day, for gathering us into this incredible community, for blessing us with the spirit of your love. We ask that you guide us on this journey, that you continue to inspire us with your one audacious dream, that we may be who you need us to be the voice of hope, the arms of love, bringing your justice into our community, city, and world. We ask all these things in your many names. Amen. Please be seated. Welcome to worship at Founders Metropolitan Community Church. Do we have any first-time visitors today? If you're a first-time visitor, raise your hand. Welcome. Welcome. It is always a joy. Thank you. Our ushers have some information and a little gift for you. If you could raise your hands again. Norm, our usher, has some information for you. And to everybody who's joining us online, thank you for tuning in. It is always a joy and a pleasure to know that as we worship here, that we are joined by people around the world. So thank you for tuning in today. We do encourage you at some point during this broadcast to scroll down to the bottom of the screen where you're watching this broadcast. There's a place where you can enter in your information, check in for worship, share any of your thoughts. Let us know what your prayers are and how we can continue to support you wherever you are in your life, spiritual journey, or physically wherever you may be around the world this week. To everybody who's here, thank you for coming on out on this absolutely glorious, beautiful day. I do encourage you to rise as you're able, to join one another. Let them know that this is the day that God is going to inspire us to do something awesome.
Beginning at the first verse. Thus says Yahweh, do what is right, work for justice. For my liberation is about to come, and my justice is about to be revealed. Happy is the person who does this, and happy is the person who holds to it, who observes the Sabbath and does not profane it, and keeps one's hands from evil deeds. Foreigners who would follow Yahweh should not say, Yahweh will exclude me from this people. Nor should the eunuch say, am I a dried up tree? For thus says Yahweh, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, who choose that which pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will create within my temple and its walls a memorial, and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will not be excised. And the foreigners who join themselves to me, ministering to me, loving the name of Yahweh and worshiping me, all who observe the Sabbath and do not profane it, and cling to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Please rise in body and spirit as you are able and join in our chorus. Then some Jewish Christians came down to Antioch and began to teach the believers, unless you follow exactly the traditions of Moses, you cannot be saved. Paul and Barnabas strongly disagreed with them and hotly debated their position. Finally, it was decided that Paul, Barnabas, and some others should go up to see the apostles and elders in Jerusalem about this question. When they finished their presentation, James spoke up. "Sisters and brothers, listen to me," he said. "Simon has told you how God initially became concerned about taking from the Gentiles a people for God's name. The words of the prophets agree with this, since the scriptures say, 'After that, I will return and rebuild the fallen house of David. I will rebuild it from its ruins and restore it. Then the rest of humankind, all the Gentiles who are called by my name, will look for God.' It is my judgment, therefore, that we shouldn't make it more difficult for Gentiles who are turning to God." Hear what the Spirit says today.
Our God is the everlasting God who doesn't grow faint and won't grow weary. To which I say, thank goodness. Because the Lord knows we do. And that's exactly the challenge. I believe that God has a dream. God creates out of love, creates each and every one of us out of love, puts us on this path, calls us, gathers us in, blesses us, gives us birth. Even when we taste that hope, when we feel that love, when we have the sense that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, eventually life interrupts. We get tired, we grow weary. There are challenges, there are conflicts we run away from. There are people we encounter who, oh my gosh, worship different than we do, or think different than we do, or vote different than we do, or look or speak or act different than we do, and we get totally freaked out. When we get tired, when we get exhausted, spiritually, emotionally, mentally exhausted, we lose our capacity to just be present, to just listen, to just be the arms of love that God has actually created us to be. And so, as I say, it's a good thing that God doesn't grow weary, because we sure do. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Everybody knows that he had a dream. He paints this incredible picture of this dream in one of his speeches. It's a dream. I believe it's not his dream, it's God's dream. He's pointing us back to this incredible vision that God has, this call that God has created from the beginning throughout all of our time as human beings. This call for us to be a people who are gathered together across all the different dimensions and divisions that we use to separate ourselves. That children might actually play together who were raised in different families, in different zip codes, with different colors of their skin. That we might actually put down our arms and open up our arms to be the arms of love. That poverty may end, that justice may prevail. This isn't his dream. He is channeling God's dream for humanity from the beginning, in the beginning. And then he actually goes on in a different writing. He says, an individual has not started living until they can rise above the narrow confines of their individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Wow. We are all, every one of us, invited into this dream to be a part of this dream. I believe that that is God's gift to us, that in God's dream, everything belongs. Everyone matters. Everybody has a purpose to fulfill, and that purpose is for us to use the gifts in our presence in order for God's dream to take one step forward, to become 1 second closer, to become one interaction nearer to becoming real and permanent, sustainable, forever. This is the gift that we've been given. This is what our lives are about. Every single one of us has a purpose and a place in that vision. Only life interrupts. We have these plans and dreams, and things don't quite go right. And when we're faced with those challenges, when we're faced with people showing up to the table that we didn't quite expect to be there, when we're faced with people who see things that look a little different than the way that we see things, when people want something different than we want, or want to worship or practice different than we want to practice, it is in those moments an opportunity exists, a choice exists. And the choice is, how do we choose? Do we live upward or downward? Do we live out of fear or out of hope and love? Do we live in ways that we are expressions of this love and inclusion? Or do we live motivated by fear, indifference, and separation? Do we run back to the small groups in which we find comfort and who will agree with whatever it is that we've already said? Or do we risk our best and deepest selves to be in community, the kind of community that God has been trying to give birth to since the very first breaths of humanity, that we might actually be the people who bridge these differences so that God's family may include all of God's children? Do we live, is the question, by acting out or acting up for good? So here's the thing. For me, In the beginning, if we follow the story, I believe all of our scriptural heritage, everything that we have, from the Bible to the stories outside of the Bible, from the very opening chapters in the book of Genesis through the people's challenges to be this people of God, through the Exodus journey, the words of the prophet, on into the ministry of Jesus in the early church, I believe that all of those texts and stories and witnesses are all pointing towards this big dream becoming real, this dream that God has. We are told that in the book of Revelation, that there will be a place and a time where God will live among the people, where there will be no more death or dying, disease or tears, where justice will prevail and poverty will end, where people will live in harmony, where violence will be no more, where fear will end and love will reign. God's love will rule. And I believe that we witness all the way back to the very opening moments of Genesis that this is what God's dream has been all along. We are told that when God creates, everything is good. God creates men and women, humankind, and it's all good. Every single one of us is created, and it's all good. And then fear enters in and interrupts, and life happens, and things just don't quite play out the way that we thought they're going to play out. And we run away, and we hide in fear. And ever since that moment, I think that we, in our own time and in our own way, have struggled to try to find our way back into that story, to find our way back into that dream, to somehow make that dream real. When we live in ways that we are open to God's Spirit, when we live in ways that we are vulnerable to another, when we live in ways that we are in conversation and community with people who think and look and act different than we are, we open ourselves up to this amazing magic of the Spirit who works in us and calls something deeper out of us so that we all can be something more together. But we live in a world filled with fear. We live with something deep within us, like our life stories from way, way, way back, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when it was necessary for us to separate ourselves out and for us to live within our own tribes and our own people. We live with these deep, deep fears and anxieties. And so when those anxieties rise up, our tendency is to run away and to run back and to stay with the people who will affirm us right where we are and won't challenge us to dream anything bigger. This is exactly what Martin Luther King is naming when he says that as an individual, we don't start to live until we can rise above those narrow confines of our own individual concerns. And yet, God's dream is so much bigger than that. We are so much bigger than that. And I believe that this challenge, these fears play out. They play out in our lives, in our relationships. They play out with our own internal challenges and competing priorities. They play out in our communities, our cities, our societies, our churches, our congregations, our corporations and businesses. In 2000, I joined a small consulting company. It was a fast, hot-growing company. They had only been around for 18 months, went from 0 to 1,200 employees in 18 months, had got $100 million in venture capital in order to go around and buy up some of the early innovators in the dot-com world. And they gathered them together in this big amalgam of 8 different offices across the country and one up in Toronto, Canada. And their whole theory, the whole dream, the whole vision was for them to be the biggest consulting company in the world, for them to do things so radically different that they're just going to change everything. Because they were the innovators. They were some of the first movers who wrote and designed some of the very first web presences for some of the nation's largest companies. And so it sounded good on paper, so much good that I guess venture capitalists, put down a $100 million bet. And so I was employee 800, and so I entered into the firm in the Chicago office, and part of my job was to help create the consulting practice in Chicago. And so I went from person to person as I wandered through this big, lofty, artsy kind of building. It was an old manufacturing company with really solid wood floors and really good bones. But that kind of artsy place that you'd expect to find this kind of really hot company. And between the foosball matches and the Friday beer bus on the rooftop, I would talk to people, and as I prepared to go and do my first presentation to one of our clients, the question that I was trying to get around in my mind as a new employee was, so what's this company all about? How do you describe who we are and what we do, and what is it that we do for our clients? And I swear, I talked to 20 people and I get 26 different answers. And every one of those answers was based on what? It was based on their own experience, their own desires, their own needs. They saw the world within their narrow frame of what they wanted it to be. You talk to the designers, the creative designers, and they thought that we were going to become some sort of an internet marketing company. And you talk to the project managers, and they thought that we're going to become some sort of a big project management firm. And you talk to the strategic consultants, and they wanted to get rid of implementation altogether because they just thought that what we should be doing is just selling and telling all about strategy and let somebody else do the hard work. The challenge is this. As many of you will remember, in early 2001, the dot-com bubble burst. And when that bubble burst, we didn't understand who we were or what we were trying to do. We didn't have within our core DNA that somehow we were trying to actually do anything other than get to the IPO. When the CEO went and visited office to office to office to try to reassure people so they didn't jump ship, he said, well, we're just going to try to skim along the surface until the market figures out what it wants from us, and then we'll provide. I think that's the way a lot of us live our lives. And when we live our lives that way, we are subject to live based in fear, not in love. We are subject to live based on how we see the world and the narrow frames that we see the world, and we are willing to run away from anything that threatens us or feels different or may disturb the comfort zone that we have come to know. Within 15 months of joining that firm, it went bankrupt. Every single employee received a termination notice because the firm was liquidated. I believe that that's what happens to us individually. It happens to us in relationships. It happens to us in communities and whole societies when we lose our way. If that's not a testament or testimony to what I think is going on within the state of our society right now, or Christianity right now. And the sad reality for me is that it's not a new story. It's been going on forever. The amazing thing to me is this: 700 years before Jesus was born, lived, died, was resurrected. 700 years earlier than that, the words of the prophet Isaiah gives us a vision, tells us what God's dream is all about. My house should be a house of prayer for all people. Not for some. Not for those from a particular tribe. Not from those who worship a certain way or have a certain language or look a certain way. And then goes even further on. The eunuchs, the people who are sexual minorities in their time, they will have a special place within my house. Now, I don't believe that he's talking, the prophet Isaiah, about some particular building in some particular jurisdiction in some particular nation or some particular state. House. The house is a household, is a family. The family of God includes every single person, has always included every single person, no matter where you are on your life journey, your spiritual journey, your ethnicity, how you speak, what you look like, how you dress, whatever your gender identity may be. This has been God's dream forever. It is our fears. It is our fears that interrupt that dream. It is our fears that blind us to that dream. It is our fears that continue to give us the narrow frames and the narrow focuses so that all that we see is what makes us comfortable, and we run away from the other, or we make them another and blame everything on them. And the story goes on. And the story goes on. Right? So 750 years later, we have the story of the early church. Check that out. So 700 years before Jesus, we're already told that God's house, that God's family includes everybody. And then you have this odd little rabbi who runs around for a few years preaching and teaching and doing some really amazing things. And then there's this small group of followers who believe in that vision and believe in that mission so deeply that they ultimately rise up and get themselves out of the darkened room to go out into the world and share this incredible, powerful message. And even as they do so, the very people who are the first generation of that holy story are threatened by difference. I don't know. No, you need to follow the law of Moses. No, the men need to be circumcised. Why are we so fixated with genitalia is the first question. But beyond that, seriously, for real. But beyond that, it is the question that we all move to when we feel threatened by difference. We have every excuse. Everybody's welcome so long as they join my party and look my way and dress this way. Everybody's welcome so long as they say the prayers and sing the songs that I like and I feel comfortable. That's not God's story. That's not God's dream. It's our dream, and that dream never is sustainable. That dream is only sustainable so long as I stay in power and I stay in control, which means ultimately I'm going to fear what? Being out of power and being out of control, which is what pushes me right back to exactly what Martin Luther King was talking about. It is why we don't start living until we can rise above our narrow confines of our individualistic concerns. Fear pushes us to worry about nothing more than my power, my place, my position, my concerns. The amazing thing is this. We are all the outsider, one way or another. We are all the foreigner, one way or another. Within the story of Israel, as the different conquering peoples came in, they mixed up the populations. They forced intermarriage. They mixed it up so much that there is no pure bloodline anyplace. It was absolutely necessary and important and critical when Isaiah speaks to say that all people are included, because you could no longer point to any one particular tribe and say, that's them, they're they. We're all they. We're all us. We are all included, and we are all on the outside at the same time. And yet God's dream is calling us to move beyond every one of our perceptions, our prejudices, our comforts, our privilege, our power, so that all may once again be reunited in this one holy vision of God. And so we have the first followers of Jesus, and they're struggling to make sense of this. What do we do with these Gentiles, these people who seem to get the message and want to do things and follow everything that Jesus said? Do we make them follow the 600 and some odd laws in the book of Moses? Do we make them change their dietary restrictions? Do we make them get circumcised? And it's a real honest debate. And here's the reality. If we're going to really be a multicultural community, if we're really going to celebrate diversity and inclusivity, what our new values actually say that we're going to celebrate, it means we need to get comfortable with difference. It means we need to find the capacity to meet people wherever they are on this journey and sit down and have open, honest, healthy conversations to work through these differences so that we can see that us being family is not based on all the differences or trying to demand uniformity in the name of unity, but for us to be one in ways that we celebrate all the diversity together, because God's vision is bigger than anything that we hang our identity upon. God's vision. What we find out if we follow through the story over and over and over again, I believe that it's present there in the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. It is there with Abraham on the journey. It is there with the people in the Exodus. It is there through voice after voice after voice of the prophets. We are told, and we see it in Isaiah 56. What does it mean to be part of this family? What does it mean to live into God's vision? It's very simple. We have to do justice. We have to get ourselves out of the way. We have to be kind and loving. It is always about that. And we certainly have to humble ourselves. Isaiah says, look, do justice. Watch yourself in the way that you actually are judging, is the way that it's translated. And what's amazing is that when God speaks through Isaiah in this moment, what God actually says is, in doing so, my justice will come near. The way that we behave absolutely matters. How we treat one another absolutely matters. Because it's in those moments that not only are we in relationship with one another, it's in those moments that we actually glimpse God's dream becoming real. It's absolutely amazing stuff. 700 years before Jesus. And so ultimately, the people are having all these conversations way outside the scope and way outside of Jerusalem. And so they decide to go back to the mother church. Get this. They take the conversation back to the mother church. This is the church that Jesus founded, that Peter led, that James the Just, Jesus' brother, ultimately becomes the leader of. They take the conversation back, and they decide to argue it out. And they talk about the pluses and the minuses, the challenges and what's going on. And ultimately, it is James who says, look, don't be so concerned about all these things. What really matters is we got to do justice. We got to love kindness. We got to live according to these main things, because this is what it means to be part of the family of God. We cannot create barriers to those who are different, to those who are new to this movement. We need to make sure that we are always open, no matter how long you've been here, whether you walked with Jesus or whether it's your first day into the building. We need to step aside and make sure that there is always room for new people to come in and fully participate where they are and as they are on this journey. And it's really important that James says this, because James, we know from the letter of James and elsewhere in the scriptures, James understood himself to be very faithful to the law of Moses. James was somebody who subscribed to all of those different 600 and some are rules. James regularly went to synagogue, and he uses his perspective, he uses his presence to be able to open up and say, it's not what makes me comfortable. It's not about the way that I worship. It's about living into this bigger dream and living into it so much that we can say, we can worship in all these different ways, and it's still good. We're still family. We're still part of the same movement. That's what this dream is all about. I believe that some 48 years ago, when the Christian church had fallen asleep again, and let me tell you, ever since Jesus, over and over and over again, the Christian church has fallen asleep. We have forgotten this dream of God's. We have relied upon ourselves. We have pushed people out. We have treated people like they are less than human, like they are less than part, like they are not part of the family of God. I believe that 48 years ago, when the Christian church was sleeping, God's Spirit gathered together a small group of people so that others would know this amazing outpouring of the love of the living God. I believe that it was Spirit's movement that gathered the first MCC worship service in that small home, so that people who had been marginalized and pushed outside and told that they had no place in the house or the home or the temple, that they had a place. I believe that in the 48 years since, we may not realize it, and we have struggled phenomenally with how to make this work. But I believe that over the course of those 48 years, we've developed a capacity to be the kind of community that God's dream was calling forth to begin with. People who cross all different socioeconomic dimensions, people who come from all different kinds of ethnicities, people who have all different kinds of spiritualities and speak different language and worship different ways. And yet, God's dream is bigger than any one of those things. We have this incredible spiritual capital within our story. It is the story of hope and the dream of courage. And yet, sure enough, when fear enters in and we are afraid of conflict, we no longer hold ourselves accountable to that dream which is bigger than ourselves. And it is when fear fragments us once more. It's not just the Christian church that's fallen asleep. Sometimes we have. Now, I believe that the work that our vision and values team has been doing has been the work of the Spirit. I believe that it is the work of the Spirit, that our core values now are love, inclusion, social justice, diversity, and spirituality. I believe that it is no coincidence that those are the same kinds of values that we are told throughout history live and breathe when God's dream is made real. Now, we're not there yet, because we have work to do.
We have our own challenges. We need to come back into relationship, and we need to talk about what multicultural worship really looks like. How do we actually be this community so that we are prepared to welcome in the next generation? We have to figure out how it is that people who've been in places, in leadership roles for 18 years, who haven't actually brought new people in, how they can learn the capacity to invite in new blood, new breath, new ideas, so that we may truly be this people that God is calling us to be. You know, a few days after everybody in that consulting company received the termination notice, 250 of us were invited to take the next step on the journey and to form a whole new community, a whole new consultancy, to try to do it one more time. And so I joined on to that movement. And sure enough, after about 3 or 4 months walking around the Chicago office, I would hear people say, well, you know, the promises that were made to me when I joined this firm 6 years ago. And it's like, no. Don't you get it? That all ended. We're creating something new. This is the next generation. And unless we're willing to let go of everything that we're holding on to, we will never embrace or accept God's dream, which is knocking on the door and embracing each and every one of us. My friends, the journey is not easy, but we have God on our side. It won't be solved tomorrow or by any one of us, but by every single one of us. But we can't sit there and wait for the church to do this or them to do that, because the decisions for us to actually leap into the future, for us to make God's dream real, depends upon how each and every one of us make the choices and choose love over fear, hope over anger. The choice is yours. The dream is God. Let us continue to work together to make it real. Amen. Spirit rain down. Oh, sorry. you to gather up the crackers, the bread, the juice, the wine, whatever you have available that you would like to use for communion. In a few minutes, we're going to be celebrating communion. And communion at the Metropolitan Community Church is an open communion, which means wherever you are on your life or spiritual journey, you're welcome to participate in this meal. And by gathering up those elements, it means wherever you are physically around the world, you'll be able to join us in this incredible celebration of God's feast of love for all God's children. And a special, I'd like to let everybody know that regularly some of the individuals who do watch us online, they do send us comments about what's happening in worship and what's going on. There's one person in particular who is very faithful about doing that, and definitely appreciate those comments, and wanted to share with us just how proud this person feels to be a Christian because of the witness in the worship of this congregation. This person is with us in Italy. They visit us from Italy online every single Sunday that we broadcast. And it's just really amazing to know that as we worship together, we are touching and transforming lives and giving hope to people literally around the world. So I thank you for everything that you do, and especially our multimedia ministry and our TV ministry. And if you feel motivated to be part of this ministry, stop by in the sound booth, talk to Sarah, talk to Camille. We will give you some training, but it's really powerful and important ministry that you just don't know how many lives you're touching or changing every time we worship. So thank you for making that possible. Couple of things that I want to highlight. Please take your worship bulletin. It doubles as a newsletter. A lot of things that are happening. On Saturday, June 3rd, so just a couple of Saturdays from now, we're going to have this incredible celebration, and we really want it to be a whole community celebration. And so starting at 4 o'clock, we're going to celebrate the end of our Bedrock Beliefs conversation. That is, there have been lots of focus groups, lots of conversation going on, and this is going to be your final opportunity to participate in that. So we really encourage you to come. It's going to be done as a carnival or a fiesta. It's going to be really, really fun, but ultimately we're going to give the congregation a way to identify, out of all the different beliefs that have been articulated, what are the ones that we hold in common? What's the base that keeps us going? So we encourage you to show up for that. It's also going to be the launch of the next phase, which is going to be really exciting. That's our vision phase. And that's the time where we're going to open up to God's Spirit and to one another and listen really deeply for what is the vision that God has put on our hearts, that God is trying to give birth to right now for today and for the future. And so we encourage you to show up for that. And then following that, at 6 p.m., there's going to be hors d'oeuvres and an anniversary dinner as we come together to celebrate 25 years of ministry for ICM. ICM is the Spanish ministry of Founders Metropolitan Community Church. And wait, there's more. And then at 7:30, there's a concert, and so we really encourage you to come on out and make it a late afternoon and evening event. Come to the church. Let us celebrate this incredible ministry that God has set upon us so that we can really, truly be this incredible movement, this multi-faith movement with many, many different expressions of what God is doing among us. This is our opportunity to do that, so I really encourage people to come along for that. On Saturday, June 24th, it's not in your bulletin, I just want to announce this. I met with the board during our board meeting, and what we agreed is that on Saturday, June 24th, in the morning, we're going to have an all-ministry, all-leaders workshop conversation. Whether you're a current leader or a future leader, if you have a passion about this congregation, this community, we invite you to come along for this conversation. We are going to be exploring the next phase of our journey, the transition, and then in the afternoon, we're going to have breakout sessions. The board will have their work session, the major ministry areas, worship, ministries like that will have their own breakout sessions to start planning for the transition period. My last Sunday is 15 weeks from now, August 20th, and we need to start planning for what does the future look like, not just during the transition, but also how do we start changing the responsibilities for how we have a much more empowered ministry as we go forward. So we're encouraging everybody to come along. There'll be a lot more information about this in the coming weeks, but I just want to announce that it is not in your worship bulletin. And then a slight change. On Saturday, June 10th, our Pride worship service is going to be at 5 p.m. So Saturday, June 10th, we are holding worship. It's going to be at 5 p.m. here in the sanctuary. We do that because on Sunday, many of us are going to be down in West Hollywood as we have the Pride protest this year, not a march, but a protest. And so we encourage you to show up for both. I was just told this morning by Reverend Elder Troy Perry that he is going to be doing some of the opening remarks on Sunday at 8 a.m. Down on the front line as we begin that protest. So we really encourage you to go down there. If there are individuals who don't feel comfortable being part of that, participating in the protest this year, please let us know, because we will open up the sanctuary. And if there's a couple of people who want to lead a simple communion and prayer service, we would bless that and we would welcome that, so that those who want to pray have a space to do that, and those who want to protest can go and do that. We are a congregation who believe that all of that is good, so please let us know. Other than that, I'm just going to ask that you give in the ways that God is blessing you. Give so that we may have the resources, so that we truly can be this incredible movement that God has set about. Thank you.
together. God, we thank you for these gifts, for all the givers in the world who work together to make your dream possible. And so we give it back to you in all your precious names. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. Let us pray together, and let us bring our hearts to a place of receiving from God and giving back to God all that we are. God, we thank you for this opportunity to be together, to pray and worship together. God, you know that we are often held back by our fears, by our coldness of heart, by the ways that we trust in ourselves first. So God, in this moment, help us to give back to you all that we are, all those things that aren't really working for us, all the ways that we've tried over and over and we still fail. So God, we give ourselves into your care. We give our hearts, our minds, souls, and bodies into your care. God, you know that all the people that you're reaching out to touch right now are in need of healing. So let us ask for ourselves, for them, for the whole world, that you would heal us. You would heal us of all the things that are standing in our way, that are standing in your way. God, we lift up these things to you for all who are ill in hospital, for all who are incarcerated, for all who are hungry, for all who are poor, for all who are disempowered by those who think they have the power. So God, we lift it all up and we ask for your good works to be done in all of our hearts and to change us in the twinkling of an eye, and let it be your way, and help us to be one in that progress towards dreaming together. Amen. Jesus prepared for us this table, and it looked like dinner for them. They were gathered together as family, as church, and he knew better about what was happening, and they didn't have a clue. But what he did was to take those things that were everyday nourishment and make them holy and give them to each of us to remind us of who we are and where we are going. So as Jesus did, he took the bread and he blessed it. He broke it. He said, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And then he took the cup and he blessed it and he lifted it up. He said, "This is my blood. This is my life, strength given for each of you, so that each of you will be filled with all that you need, all the gifts of God." So God, we pray over these elements today that we would receive your gifts, that we would be open to receive your gifts, that all people who need to receive these gifts will be open and will receive it now. We pray all these things in your wonderful names. Amen. In order to prepare for serving this feast, I'd ask the ushers, the acolytes, the servers to come forward now. We want all of you, our guests, all of our participants, to know that Founders MCC, as well as other MCCs around the world, we celebrate an open communion. That means you are included. You do not need to be a member of this church or any church to receive communion here. You're welcome just as you are. In a few moments, the ushers will guide all of us to follow and to come forward for communion. All are welcome.
the world know that our worship is done, but it's time for our service to begin. May you know that our God is great, so great that God's love and God's dream includes each and every one of us, wherever we are on our life or spiritual journey. May you go forth bringing that hope and that love into the world, that others may know through you this amazing love of this amazing God. Let us rise as we are able and sing our closing song.
Thank you for joining us today. By participating with us online, you are an extension of this church's membership ministry. Wherever you are in the world, we are so excited to embrace you, to hear from you, and to pray for you. Please connect with us and interact with us by telephone, email, or social media. Be an angel amongst us by supporting this ministry through our donation link. With your help, we expand and reach a greater number of people with God's love through this ministry. We invite you to write to us so we can be in prayer and praise with you. You are a part of Founders Metropolitan Community Church. Email us directly, info@mccla.org. May God bless you.